Chapter 5. The Sentence. The call came on a Wednesday. Middle of the week, middle of the afternoon, one of those nothing hours where you're halfway through your workload and halfway out of patience. I was at my desk, screen full of some spreadsheet that already felt unimportant in a way I couldn't name yet. My mobile buzzed against the table, a little insect of sound. Private number. I knew. The surgery had been a week ago, the biopsy taken, the tissue shipped off to strangers in white coats. I'd been told 7 to 10 business days for results, as if they were posting me a parcel. I picked up on the second ring. Hello? Hi, is that Cal? A woman's voice, receptionist bright. Yeah. Hi, it's Kerry from Dr. Malik's rooms. He'd like you to come in to discuss your test results. There it was. Are they... I started, then stopped. The question jammed in my throat, heavy. She hesitated. He'll go through everything with you, she said, reverting to script. Can you come this afternoon at 3:30? 3:30. I looked at the clock on my screen. 2:08. 90-odd minutes suddenly stretched out like wet chewing gum. I'll be there, I said. Great. See you soon. She hung up. For a moment, I just sat there, phone still in my hand, the office noise around me collapsing into a dull blur. You build small, irrational hopes around logistics. If it's bad, they'll call sooner. If it's really bad, they'll say something on the phone. If it's nothing, they'll tell you straight out and save you the trip. None of that is true, of course. They have procedures, liability, policy. But still, the shreds of wishful thinking cling. They wanted me in the room. They wanted my body in a chair, my reaction contained within the four walls of a consultation office instead of spilling through a phone line. I stood up too fast, the world tilting for a second. My boss looked over from his desk. Everything all right? He asked. Doctor, I managed. Need to go. His expression shifted to concern, but he nodded. Of course. Keep me posted, yeah? I nodded back, already halfway out of my own skin. The drive to the clinic felt like moving underwater. Traffic lights, brake lights, indicator clicks, all of it slow, viscous. The radio was on low, some talkback nonsense, a host arguing about elected officials and petrol prices. Their voices irritated me, their confidence, their free, easy outrage. I turned it off. In the silence of the car, my mind filled the space. Maybe it's benign. Maybe they got it all already. Maybe he just wants to talk about next steps. Voice therapy, laser, worst case, some radiotherapy. People bounce back from that all the time. Underneath that, quieter but denser, you know what this is. I parked badly, crooked between two lines, didn't fix it. Walked into the waiting room, already knowing where every chair was from the last visit. The receptionist smiled with professional warmth. Hi, Cal. Take a seat. He's just running a few minutes behind. Of course he was. Doctors live in a different relationship to time. Yours is suspended. Theirs is double booked. I sat. Across from me, a TV on the wall played a health segment with the sound off. A newsreader's mouth moved silently beneath captions about flu season. People in stock footage laughed in slow motion, their perfect throats exposed in carefree hilarity. I looked away. A kid in a school uniform fiddled with his phone, his mother beside him, filling out forms. An older woman leafed through a magazine without really seeing it. The man with the electrolarynx wasn't there this time, but I could feel the ghost of him in the room. That straight scar, the buzzing voice. Cal? The nurse called. The small flinch. Yeah. She smiled and led me down the hallway. The consultation room was exactly as I remembered. Neutral walls, laminated diagrams of ears and sinuses and larynxes, the faint, sterile smell of disinfectant. Dr. Malik stood as I came in and gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Good to see you, he said, in that calm, slightly too bright tone. Good to see you. He sat. A manila folder lay in front of him, thick with printouts, my name on the tab. The space between us was maybe a meter. It felt like an ocean. How's the throat feeling after the biopsy? He asked. Small talk, throat talk. Sore, I said, but better. He nodded. That's good. He looked down at the folder, then back at me. His eyes were kind, but there was a gravity there now that hadn't been before. I realized I was holding my breath. "All right," he said softly. "So, we have your results back." Time collapsed into a pinpoint. The biopsy shows a squamous cell carcinoma on the right vocal cord. The words landed one by one, like stones dropping into a well. Biopsy shows squamous cell carcinoma. He didn't say cancer straight away, as if softening the syllables would make them less lethal. Migraine translated anyway. Cancer on the right vocal cord. For a second, the room blurred. Not dramatically, just a heat behind my eyes, a light brightness around the edges. I heard myself say, "Oh, okay," as if he'd told me the weather. He kept talking. "The good news," he said, "is that it appears to be at an early stage, localized. It hasn't, from what we can see, spread beyond the cord. That gives us options." Options? I nodded, as if I understood. Inside, nothing was nodding. Inside, something had gone very, very still. Early stage, localized. All my life I'd been measured against stages. Developmental, educational, seizure classifications. Now I'd been slotted neatly into another system. Stage, localized, options. "What does that mean?" I asked, each word heavy. He took a breath. "It means," he said carefully, "that we have a chance to treat this effectively, with a high likelihood of removing the cancer." He paused, the pivot. "But," he added, "the treatment will almost certainly involve significant impact on your voice." Almost certainly. Significant impact. Of course it would. Of course the one cancer that decided to set up shop did it right there, on the fragile strips of tissue I'd wrestled with every day for nearly 40 years. I stared at his mouth as he continued, watching his easy syllables fall out. "For early glottic cancers like this, there are two main options," he said. "Radiotherapy or surgery. Radiotherapy can preserve more of the voice in some cases, but it comes with its own risks and long-term side effects. Surgery is more direct. We go in and remove the lesion, and, depending on margins, possibly more of the cord." Possibly more of the cord. "Remove," I echoed, stupidly, as if the word needed verifying. "Yes," he said, "cut out the cancerous tissue. Make sure we have clear margins so it doesn't come back." The phrase "doesn't come back" did a small sharp loop in my brain. My speech had always come back after blocks. My consciousness had always come back after seizures. Now we were talking about something we wanted gone forever. I should have been grateful for that, for the possibility of clean edges, of eradication. All I could think was, what else goes with it? I swallowed. My throat felt like sand. "If you take it," I said, each word feeling like I was chewing glass, "what happens to my voice?" He didn't sugarcoat it. "There will be change," he said. "You already know that. It may become significantly hoarser, weaker. Depending on how much we need to remove, there is a possibility you could lose functional speech." Possibility, functional, lose. The clinic air conditioning hummed quietly above us. In the corridor outside, a phone rang, muffled. Everyday sounds, completely unchanged by the fact that the man in this chair had just been told the thing he'd fought to keep his whole life was now on the chopping block. Saint, struggled, I heard myself say, voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. "My whole life, to talk." He nodded, eyes steady on mine. "I know," he said gently. "I read your history." History, a neat file, summarized in bullet points. Speech impairment, epilepsy, medications. Now, carcinoma of the right vocal cord. My history had always been written by other people, therapists, neurologists. Now, carcinoma of the right vocal cord. My history had always been written by other people, therapists, neurologists, teachers. Now an oncologist was adding his line. "I found my voice," I went on, not because it was the right time for confession, but because it came out of me without permission. "It's never been good, but it's mine." It sounded pathetic, said out loud like that, a child showing a broken toy to an adult who understood engines. Dr. Malik didn't look away. I understand, he said quietly. This is a cruel irony. You've worked very hard for something that is now under threat. I don't take that lightly. Cruel irony, I almost laughed, a short, humorless exhale. You spend your whole life pushing against one wall, thinking you've made a bit of room, only to have someone open a door on the other side and tell you the whole house is compromised. What if I don't do anything? I asked, even though I knew. I needed to hear it. He folded his hands. If we don't treat it, he said, the cancer will grow. It can affect your breathing. It can spread to other structures in the neck, to lymph nodes, potentially beyond. Left entirely alone, it is life-threatening. Life-threatening. I stared at the little plastic model of a larynx on his desk. 2 pristine vocal folds, white and smooth. Mine, in contrast, were harboring cells that had decided their remit was no longer oscillation and sound, but division and invasion. The choice was obscene in its clarity. Keep the cancer and, maybe, keep more of the voice for a while until it choked me, or cut it out and accept that whatever came after would not be what I'd spent 4 decades learning to live with. Will I die? I asked. He answered like a man who'd had to say some version of this too many times. We have a very good chance, he said, stressing very, of curing this if we treat it promptly. If we do nothing, the risks increase dramatically. With treatment, your prognosis is strong. Strong. Cure. Words people cling to like flotation devices. I heard them, let them bob around me, but the water was already up to my chest. He started talking about timelines, surgery dates, referrals to a radiotherapist in case I wanted a second opinion on options, voice therapy afterward, rehabilitation. I nodded when it seemed appropriate, asked a few practical questions, wrote nothing down, though I'd brought a notepad. There's a point in any consultation like that where you stop absorbing specifics. Your brain, full up with one word, cancer, decides that's quite enough for today, thanks. Do you have someone with you? He asked as the conversation wound down. No, I said. I drove. He hesitated. It's a lot to take in on your own, he said gently. Is there someone you can talk to this evening? Family, partner, friend? I nodded. Yeah, I lied automatically. Yeah. He printed something, a referral, information sheets, hospital admission forms, glossy pamphlets with smiling cancer survivors on the cover, as if that would make it more palatable. As I stood to leave, he said my name, Cal. I looked back. We are going to do everything we can, he said, to treat this, to give you the best outcome possible. Your voice may change, but you are more than your voice, all right? The sentence hit me with a double slap. You are more than your voice. I'd heard versions of it for years. You're more than your stutter. You're more than your seizures. You're more than your diagnosis. It's meant to be comforting, a reminder that personality, soul, worth, whatever you want to call it, aren't housed in one failing part, but standing there, feeling the raw edge of that word, cancer, cut across years of effort, it landed differently. My voice had never just been one feature among many. It had been the battleground for my right to be recognized as a person. When you grow up in a world that equates fluency with intelligence, volume with confidence, and quick talk with value, your voice becomes your paperwork, your proof. Without it, people make up their own forms for you. Simple, slow, childlike. Now the one bureaucratic tool I had to argue back was under threat. I walked out of the office on unsteady legs, my throat feeling suddenly full, as if awareness itself could swell tissue. The sunlight outside was too bright. Cars moved in jerks. A magpie swooped down onto the grass near the car park, eyeing a chip. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The diagnosis hung in the air like a third presence. I have cancer. I tried the sentence out silently first, as if saying it in my head might make it less real. Then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I spoke it aloud. I have cancer. The words snagged, as always, but they made it into the open air. Hearing them in my own voice, hoarse, shaky, felt like tearing something. My first reaction was not noble. It wasn't, I will fight this. It was, of course it's here. Of course it picks the one part of me that already cost me so much. Not lungs, not colon, not skin. The vocal cords. The place where, for years, strangers had leaned in with professional curiosity, trying to figure out why the sounds didn't flow right. The place therapists had tried to coax into smoother vibrations. The place my own tongue had failed to coordinate with. I thought of all the times I'd sat in speech therapy with picture cards and mirrors, feeling like my throat was a locked door and I was the stupid kid who couldn't find the key. Now someone was telling me that behind that door, in the dark, a cluster of cells had been multiplying. All this time you were working on your speech, a cold little voice inside whispered. Your throat was working on something else entirely. I didn't cry in the car, not yet. Shock has its own etiquette. It asks you to keep your composure until you're somewhere it feels appropriate to fall apart. I drove to my parents' house. At some point on the way, I must have texted Mum, "Can I come over?" She replied immediately, "Of course. Everything okay?" I didn't answer. When I pulled into their driveway, she was already at the front door, wiping her hands on a tea towel, anxiety written in the lines around her mouth. "Hey, love," she said, voice too bright. "Come in. Want a cuppa?" I shook my head. She saw my face then, really saw it. Her own expression crumpled, just a little. "What did they say?" she asked quietly. We sat at the kitchen table. How many times in my life had hard news been delivered at that table? Report cards, seizure reports, medication changes. I tried to say it neatly. They found cancer. The word didn't stick in my mouth the way others did. It slid out, heavy but smooth. The gravity of it seemed to clear a path. Mum's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Cal." She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, hard, like she could anchor me to the earth. "Where?" she asked, already knowing. Vocal cord." Her eyes closed briefly, a small, private flinch. "Of course," she murmured. "Of course it bloody is." We sat in silence for a few moments. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and stopped. "What did they say?" she asked eventually, defaulting to practical. "What happens now?" I gave her the condensed version. Early stage, surgery, maybe radiotherapy, good prognosis, possible loss of voice. The words tasted like someone else's lines. "They might take it," I said, fingers unconsciously drifting to my throat. "The voice." She squeezed my hand harder, eyes shining. "They can't just," she started, then stopped, because she knew they could. Knew that in the hierarchy of preservation, breath comes before sound. "I thought," I said, the anger finally starting to leak through the numbness. "My whole life for this." I tapped my throat. "And now," my voice trailed off, not from a block this time, but from a lack of words. How do you articulate the entanglement of rage and fear and bitter humor? I thought of every time someone had told me, kindly, "Use your voice, speak up," as if it were a volume knob I'd been too timid to turn. Now, in a matter of months, doctors might have to switch it off entirely to stop a growth. I thought of every time I'd been told my voice was brave, just for existing in public. Now, they'd use words like brave for agreeing to the treatment that cut it down. Now, in a matter of months, doctors might have to switch it off entirely to stop a growth. I thought of every time I'd been told my voice was brave, just for existing in public. Now, they'd use words like brave for agreeing to the treatment that cut it down. I thought of all the activism slogans I'd seen online. Find your voice, use your voice, raise your voice. No one made posters for lose your voice to save your life. Mum got up and busied herself making tea anyway, because that's what you do in our family when the world cracks. You go through the motions of normal. Kettle on, mugs out, tea bags, sugar. Her movements were jerky, automatic. I sat there, listening to the familiar kitchen sounds, and felt myself sliding into a new category. Before, I'd been the son with the tricky speech, the son with epilepsy, the son you kept an eye on at gatherings in case the noise or the lights or the fatigue tipped him over. Now I was also the son with cancer, a fresh label on an already crowded file. The immediate emotional fallout wasn't dramatic, not in the way people like to imagine. There was no pounding the table, no screaming, "Why me?" at the ceiling. It was smaller, meaner, a series of quiet, vicious thoughts. Haven't I done enough? Haven't I given up enough ground already? Why here? Why this? Haven't I earned the right to keep my broken, hard-won voice in whatever state it's in? Underneath that, an older, more frightened echo. Who am I if I can't even attempt to speak? For all my internal monologue, for all my writing, for all the ways I'd learned to exist on the margins of conversations, I still clung to the option of sound, the right to try, to open my mouth and, however slowly, push something audible into the space between me and another person. The diagnosis took that from hypothetically fragile to concretely endangered. Mum put a mug of tea in front of me. "We'll get through this," she said, voice breaking on through. "You hear me? We've done hard before. We can do this." We. There was comfort in that, and for the first time, a thread of guilt. Because I knew that while the cancer was in my throat, the fear was in hers, in my father's, in my siblings, in the handful of friends who would receive the news and grope for words that didn't sound like platitudes. My body had never just been mine. It had been a family project, a communal worry, an object of professional interest. Now it was also a site of malignancy. Later that night, alone in my flat, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror again. Same face, same jaw, same throat. I watched myself say words, testing them like you'd test a leg after twisting an ankle. My name is Cal. Static. I have cancer. More static. The cruelty of it struck me then with full force. There were people who wasted their voices on cruelty, on lies, on noise. People who shouted over others, who used their fluency to dominate, to belittle, to fill space with nothing. And here I was, someone who had rationed every syllable, who had treated speech like a scarce resource, who had spent a lifetime budgeting breath, and this was where the tumor chose to lodge. It felt personal, even though I knew, rationally, that cancer is blind to narrative. Bodies accumulate damage and errors. Cells misread their instructions. Mutations happen. Smoking or drinking or genetics or sheer bad luck. That's the science. But standing there, listening to that haunted rasp, it was impossible not to feel some cosmic joke being played. A punchline I hadn't agreed to. In the days that followed, everything split into before and after. Before the sentence. In conversations, what few I had, I heard an edge in people's responses now. A carefulness, a too bright positivity. "You caught it early, that's good. Treatment these days is incredible. At least it's not. At least, always that. As if gratitude was a debt I owed simply for the chance to survive, regardless of what might be taken in the process. I nodded along, agreed where it seemed expected. Inside, another voice, the clear one, the one that had watched me crawl through speech therapy and stagger through seizures, said, "You are about to lose the thing you fought hardest for. You are allowed to grieve that, even if it saves your life, especially if it saves your life." The irony wasn't clean. It wasn't poetic in a way that made sense. It was messy. It hurt. That week, every time I opened my mouth to speak, I heard a countdown ticking underneath the words. Numbered days, numbered conversations, numbered attempts at jokes that might or might not land. I didn't know then exactly how or when my voice would go. I just knew that the vague threat that had always lurked at the edges of my life, one day you might lose even this, had stepped into the center of the room, pulled up a chair, and introduced itself by name. Carcinoma. A sentence with no stutter. A sentence that would decide the shape of all the others that followed.